brief introduction if I have not had the pleasure to meet you before at an event or at a review or in passing or anything. My name is Shane Fagan. I'm a landscape architect in town. I have an office down in Old Town. One of the things I've been working on the side outside of my own projects and project work is I'm really interested in kind of how all the different landscape architecture programs are teaching software, difficulties that they're running into. They have limited amount of time to teach you all. Then you go to try to get a job. They have very high expectations that you all are some sort of experts, which is not the goal of graduating. You should not be an AutoCAD expert. You should know your ways in and out. That will definitely help you get a job. So I've been doing a lot of talking to different programs, offering workshops. I'll talk a little bit about the Discord at the end. That's just another free resource for you all. And this is part of that effort to sort of try to lower that hurdle of learning software so you can focus on critical thinking, learning how to design, all the other thousands of things that you have to do to complete a project. This should be a lowered hurdle for us in the profession, so this is part of my effort. So that being said, I don't want to waste too much time. So the files I sent out, we're going to get to those. I'm going to first start with just sort of an introduction and the layout of Rhino, like where stuff is located. Hopefully you do have some knowledge of AutoCAD at this point, because what's nice is there's a ton of overlap. Most of the commands are exactly the same. The idea of how you approach a file and setup, all of that's exactly the same as well. So I'll kind of be talking about both as I'm working through this. So let's see, let's go to Rhino first. So if you've never opened the program up before, this is all completely new. That's totally okay. That's kind of where we're starting first. So when you go to open Rhino, this is going to be the first thing that you're going to see. Basically, it's 4 windows, just like you would have into your model space, just like you would have in CAD, except for you've got 4 because now we're dealing in 3D. We're going to mostly be working in the perspective window. That's this one up here. The titles for each of those are in the top left-hand corner. At any point, you can double-click on one of those and make it your full screen. You definitely want to work like this. If working in the 4 quadrants can get a little, it can strain your eyes a lot. But all you got to do is double-click that whatever window you want to go into. If you want to go back, double-click on it again. You can go to top view, side view, all of those types of things. Similarly, and I'm not sure what version. Do you know what version of Rhino? 6? Oh, do I have 6? I have 8. Has anybody opened the file I sent yet? Might not work, to be honest, but we'll get around. We'll get around that here. Pretty much the layout looks exactly the same. Hopefully your layout pretty much looks exactly what I've got right now. I might have a couple of extra tabs and buttons up here, but the idea is the same. Down here at the bottom, you can also click through your different tabs into your different views as well. So that'll make a little bit more sense once we have some things in here. Instead of having a top ribbon like in CAD, a lot of their drawing tools, modifying tools, all of that's over here on the left-hand side. We'll dive into a few of these. All of these also, if you left-click and hold, it always expands to like a larger menu of hundreds of other options. The thing to keep in mind with CAD, with Rhino, basically any software that you're going to learn in school, don't worry about all the stuff it can do. Focus on getting really good at 10% of that program. That's what you're going to use 90% of the time when you're modeling, drafting, doing anything like that. I think that's the exact same for Rhino or for AutoCAD as well. Get yourself really good at the basics. Don't worry about all of the fancy tricks and tools and plugins and all of that. Get good at the basics first. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. So we're not going to necessarily dive into every single one of these because I don't use probably 70% of the commands that are in here just because there's easier workarounds. But all of those are over here. Like I said, that's a mix of drawing tools, modifying tools. When I say modifying tools, basically like you draft a rectangle, you modify it by doing like a fillet on the corner. So fillet is a modifier. making a rectangle is a drawing tool. So anything you're actually drawing, that's going to be a drawing tool. If you're ever changing something you already drew, that's a modifier. Up at the top, sort of your typical things, file, edit. We'll dive into a couple of these, but most of these you have access through the commands. There's a couple of icons up here that we'll touch on just kind of as I'm talking. There's also snaps here. We'll also hopefully talk about snaps once we start drafting some stuff. So that's kind of basic layout, window change. How to move around is a new thing for everybody. So I'm just going to quickly just draw a box just so you can see us actually moving. And I'm going to talk about these view types here in a second. But differences between AutoCAD and Rhino are how you kind of navigate your space. I'm going to start in perspective because the other windows are pretty easy. If you hold down your right mouse button, that's your orbit. If you all are in there and you want to orbit around something, there's a little box here on the corner. Just click. Here, I'll even do it again. You just click once, draw the bottom of the rectangle, click again to give it some height. So at least then you have something to kind of rotate around. So yeah, orbit, rotate, same idea. That's going to be right click and hold. Left click and hold is selection. That works exactly how it does in AutoCAD. If you click and drag to the right, you're going to have, you basically need to completely cover something with your selection window to select it. So you can see I'm going over that box, but I'm not selecting it. I'd have to go, like I could do this and select that back one, even though it was over top of the front one. I didn't completely cover it, so I didn't get selected. That's if you go to the right. If you go to the left, anything I barely touch, that gets selected. So you'll probably get into a habit of you always just start to go to the left. That's what I do. You just kind of build in that muscle memory. But that's the left mouse click and hold. If you just click it, it doesn't do anything. Same thing with the left. Actually, left click, if you just click it and let go, acts like enter or spacebar. So I actually use that to start to end commands, things like that. Do you have scroll wheel? Okay, good. You have scroll wheels on there. Scroll wheel, if you click it, you get this little widget that comes up. Don't worry about any of this stuff. But just like in AutoCAD, you would use that to zoom in and out. Similarly, if I hold down Shift and my, if I hold down Shift, whoops, here we go, and hold down my right mouse button, that's pan. If I hold down Control and right mouse button, that's sort of almost like a dolly zoom. So just different ways to get around. Mostly you'll be using zoom with your scroll wheel, orbit, and that's pretty much most of the ways that you kind of get around the program. So that's sort of how to get around. Let's now, any questions before I jump into drawing tools? I know I'm going fast. I'm sorry. It's all recorded. You can listen to it again. I also talk kind of fast. I just want to cover enough that you all can kind of know what to look for and try a few things out. So drawing tools. Difference between this and AutoCAD is now we've got 3D objects as well. I don't do any 3D in AutoCAD. It's a complete mess. Stay out of 3D AutoCAD. Just don't bother with it. But we have both 2D and 3D drawing tools to work in here. So let's start with basic 2D ones. Point, right up here. You can also type point or PT is the shorthand for that. That just makes little points. You can click, point them wherever you want. Basic points. So we'll come back to that when we get to grading. Those are handy. Again, if I previously did the point command, I can also just right click on my mouse and it starts that command right back up. So I don't have to go back and hit the buttons to keep adding ones. I can also do, there's multiple points in here. Again, lots of different options in there, but that's your basic point. So I'm just going to select those, hit delete. Next one up that's going to be really handy to learn, polyline. Works just like polylines work in AutoCAD. So I'm actually going to switch. We'll do this a lot. Double click on perspective. I'm going to go to essentially my plan view, top view. So if I left click my mouse, that starts the polyline command. Just like in AutoCAD, if I hold down Shift, I go into temporary orthogonal mode, so I can go in 90-degree increments. Click again until I hit enter or right-click on my mouse. I will continue to be in that command. At any point, just like in CAD, I can do A, enter. Now I'm in arc mode. Make as many curves as I want. Everything's going to be tangential from the previous curve, so you can make really nice shapes. You need to switch that at any point. You can always change your direction. All your commands in all your commands in Rhino, just like AutoCAD, you always got several options within that command. Polyline's pretty basic though, so we'll just stick with a typical sort of shape. It will also, that's a good example, it'll also stay in whatever mode it was when I stopped the last command. So this one was already in a curve shape, so it stayed curve shape. I can type L, enter for line, back in line. Then I hit enter, it's in. If I do the command again, I'm starting in straight segments. Last thing to really cover on Polyline, even though there's tons of options in there, worth exploring. We'll touch on that in later sessions as well. We're going to hopefully do 2 more. Once I get to a certain point, I can hit C, enter. That's going to automatically close it. If I'm in an arc mode, it'll close with an arc. Big thing I'm going to push today, next time, every time you hear me talk about software or any of these programs, try to close your lines as much as you can, both in CAD, especially in CAD, because that's going to help you a lot going into Rhino. I mean, it'll help you go into SketchUp if you prefer using SketchUp, but the more you can have your line work closed, the less work it'll be later on. I would say that even works of going from CAD to Photoshop and the workflow that, that way you can select closed shapes and things like that. So try to close wherever you can. Other drawing tools of importance over here that are 2D, again, all kind of work very similar to CAD. This one, I actually will hold down the left mouse button and click the second one. This is called Curve Interpolate Points. You don't need to remember the name, doesn't matter. The point is that if I click on this one, I get a spline that's going to stay within those points. So you can make some really nice organic shapes, things like that. You can't build off of splines, so I suggest when you're putting construction sets together, never use splines ever. Always use arcs and things like that, because you can actually build off of it. But if you're just making something nice looking and you want it to have a little bit of a graphic nature to it, splines can look really nice. The reason I don't like using the other version, which is the main one up here, that's called control point curve, is that's gonna do this weird, I don't even know mathematically how all that works, but that line's based off of location of these outside points, and you can adjust them. But for me, it's hard for me to visualize how that curve is working if my points are not along that curve. So I would always suggest doing the second one if you're going to use any splines. Circle, that's going to work just like it does in CAD. Typically, we'll start with your center point. There's a lot of other options in here you can use. Like I actually use this 3-point a lot when I'm trying to figure things out, like size or radii of things. That one's really handy. This is what I like about Rhino, is it's got a lot of these mathematical ways to make shapes based off of a variety of points. Rhino, which is different from things like 3ds Max, if you've ever used that, or a lot of other modeling software, is Rhino works, it calculates sizes and shapes of things based off of curves and surfaces rather than meshes. Again, you don't necessarily need to know what that is, but what's nice is it keeps your file size small. When you export, everything gets converted to meshes anyway, but it's a way to produce very accurate drawings without overloading your computer with triangular meshes. So a lot of options in Circle to kind of check out. Ellipse, all the same options you'll have in AutoCAD as far as how to draw an ellipse, so you can just kind of check that out. Same with arc, rectangle, same idea, you're basically just drawing a rectangle. Any of these at any point, like if I'm doing a rectangle, just like in CAD, it's going to default to your X axis first. So if I need a rectangle that's 40 feet by 20, I would click my first corner point, type 40 feet. Oh, we've been drawing very small. And then to get my other direction, I would push my mouse in the direction I want it to go, type 20 feet, and now I have an exact size. If I need to double check that, DI for distance. Here's a point where I'm going to turn my, actually, let's talk about snaps right now before we go into other things. So snaps, same versions you have in AutoCAD, endpoint, midpoint, center point, all of those. There's some additional ones over there for like vertex. That's going to be for a mesh point, things like that. Probably won't get into those today, but all the same snaps you'd have in AutoCAD are over there. Just like in AutoCAD, I suggest this to anybody I'm running through software stuff with. I keep my snaps off as much as I can. If you like having all your different snap options turned on and you have snaps turned on at all times, once you get a complicated model, everything's going to be jumping around and trying to snap to stuff. To me, that's a headache. It takes me out of my sort of flow. So just like in AutoCAD, I usually keep I'll click my F3 button. That's your snaps on and off. Here, they have a nice little setting where I will keep, you can see down here, there's a point where it says disabled. So that means off, essentially. I keep it off, but then at any point while I'm in a command, let's say we had this rectangle and I wanted to draw a circle on the corner. Well, if snaps are off, I don't know if I'm going to hit that corner exactly. But with it disabled, if I hold down Alt while I'm in the command, all of these turn on. I can then snap to that corner, let go of Alt, and I'm off the snaps. So it's sort of a temporary on and off. Once you get into a good habit of basically, I almost just leave my finger on the Alt button, and I know when I need to turn it on and off. And I find that to be a lot handier than constantly having to turn snaps on and off or click certain ones on and off. So again, then if I wanted to snap to the midpoint, instead of keeping everything on, I'll hold down Alt, click there, and snap to my the midpoint. So again, you'll have your preferences for ones you want to keep on and off. Since I use the Alt method, I usually keep most of these checked, but that'll be your preference. Okay, so we're still on drawing tools. Pretty much the last 2D drawing tool is like to make shapes, which again, this is a good one to sort of practice your options up here. First question after we started the command, it's going to ask us a question. Okay, you want to make some sort of polygon. Where is the center of the inscribed polygon? So you can have inside or outside of a circle inscribed polygon. Difference between the two of that, let's look at, okay, we'll do a pentagon. So I'm going to snap to the center there. It's going to use this point where my mouse is. If I type in a size, that from the center point, that's what's going to give me my size width. So if I type like 10 feet from the center point of our pentagon, it's going, what did I just say, 5 feet? 5 feet to that point over there. If I do that again, but I switch to circumscribed, and I click there, you can see now it's going to the segment part of the polygon. So it's just a different way of doing it. Let's do what I did last time, 5 feet. So you'll see, whoops, 5 feet. Oh, we must have done bigger than that. Basically, this is your difference between circumscribed is on the inside. Your circle will be on the inside of the shape. Whatever the other, what was the other one? I don't even remember what it was. Inscribed, yeah. Circumscribed and inscribed. That's the difference between the two. Don't really draw a lot of those, to be honest, but it's there if you need it. So that's pretty much all the 2D stuff. Again, lean on your AutoCAD knowledge because it's pretty much all the same stuff. 3D shapes, then we have the 3D version of all of those. So if we've got, let's see, so we started with a polyline. Closest thing for that and the rectangle is going to be just a straight surface. This is one where there's probably 2 different versions in here that I use the most. So if I click and hold, go down 1 row, you've got basically a rectangle with points on kind of opposite corners. That is exactly how you do a rectangle. So just like we did this one up here, if I click there, 40 feet, 20 feet, but now we've got a surface. I can tell by these are called ISO curves on the inside. I can tell that there's a shape there or a surface there because of those ISO curves. Let's actually switch back to our perspective view so we can see this. Ooh, got really big. So then you can also see difference between just a regular curve. Oh, they call polylines curves in Rhino, so I'll say curves a lot. But you can see this is just a border rectangle. This one actually has a surface to it. If you're not seeing this sort of surface shaded view, right-click on your perspective. Down here, you've got a bunch of options on how you can view your workspace. So usually by default, everything starts in wireframe, which top view, I usually work in wireframe. Maybe side view, I'll work in wireframe. Perspective, I want to see what's solid. I tend to work in shaded. I think that is the lowest resource usage on your computer, and you can still see the surfaces. But within there, you know, you can go to rendered. That's going to put shading on things. Like if where did our boxes go? You know, add some shading, ambient occlusion on the corners. You can kind of see some stuff, but not really great to model in. That's more of maybe working towards what a rendered view, or if you're going to export a view, something like that. Then, you know, there's a bunch of different versions in here. Maybe you'll prefer one of these. Again, I like shaded, but feel free to check all of these out to see which ones you like. I mean, even ones like, is it artistic? Or maybe pen? You know, it'll give you like a nice looking shape and edges and some shading and think, oh, my computer doesn't like that. Yeah, so, you know, like you could build something and then just export a view of that. It's not bad. You can sketch over. That's when I first started. I would build the most basic stuff in Rhino. I'd print it out. I'd put trace on it, and I'd fill in like people, trees, whatever, because I didn't know how to do all the really advanced rendering stuff yet. And when, to be honest, when I was going to school, all that stuff was a lot harder. Lumions, it's not my favorite, but man, low learning curve. You can get some decent stuff out of that pretty quickly. Unfortunately, everybody uses it, so everybody's stuff looks the same, which I don't like, but that's what it is. But if you're first starting out, you can get some really nice looking things to just either print, draw over, whatever. Let's go back to shaded. We'll keep moving. The other surface that I'll use a lot, and I'll show you why I use that, is the main one that's on the icons. It's got 4 points on it. This one, I'm going to actually snap to some stuff. So this one I can use to make it go in multiple dimensions. I could have, let's even make it twisted. So I could do like 1, 2, 3, 4. So I've got elevation on 1 point, and it just builds that surface and makes that connection. So you can have some really interesting shapes. If we've got time, we're going to get, it's already almost half an hour. If we get to grading, I use this and the loft command, which I'll show you that here in a second. I use that to build a lot of my graded surfaces when they have to be exact. There's 3 different, I think 3 realistic ways to build surfaces. We're going to try to get to that, like topography. But this is one of the methods because you can make some quick shapes pretty fast. Let's see. Box, we kind of covered that one. That's basically making, a rectangular box. Boolean, we'll get to that in a moment. Let's see what else we got. Project, we're not going to do that one. Spheres, where are our spheres? If you hold down your left mouse button on top of the box, you'll see all your other shapes, basic shapes are in here. So you got cylinders, spheres, ellipsoids, cones with the top cut off, pyramids with the top cut off. Basically everything you could think of are in here and worth exploring. All of those have different methods of building. Like if you do the tube, You're basically drawing a circle. You're drawing the inside or outside part of that tube. Then you're extruding it. So pretty simple. You could type in distances, because then you know what your pipe thickness size is. So if you need something exact, you can do that. So a lot of options all within these shapes, all worth exploring. With a couple of tries, you'll figure out how to build all of them. Usually it's make the base first, establish that size, and then establish a height to all of those. So, pyramid, same idea. You're basically drawing, whoops, what did I just do? Pyramid. Why is it shaped like that? Okay, I guess it's a 5-sided pyramid. I think we can change that. Yeah, here we go. So basically you're making your base, which is a square first, and then you establish your height. All of those you can type in. So and I highly encourage you as you're modeling, type in your distances, sizes as much as you can, because then you know you don't have some random shape something that you're basing other sizes off of. Any questions?
Where were you when you were able to connect to the box and up?
So that is that version of that, because just like CAD, there's like 5 ways you can do everything. That version was under surface, so it's the main surface one. It's kind of skewed and it's got 4 points on the outside. Basically within here, to make those surfaces, your main ones, the 4 points, the 2 points, which was just the flat rectangle. But then you can do one with 3 points, where your third point's kind of in the middle, and I don't know. To me, that's starting to get more complicated than it needs to be. But those are the 2 main ones you'll use in here. Again, so much other stuff in here. We're going to talk about extruding and lofting and all of that as well. But as far as drawing, drafting shapes and curves, those are your main things that you're going to use. Jumping into modifiers, now that we have things drawn, we can start modifying that stuff. That can be modifying the shape, like a fillet on a corner. That could be using 2 shapes to connect to each other. Lots of different options in there. So first one, let's use these as a comparison. I'm going to first go to my top view. So just like in CAD, if I did fillet, and this is where you have to start kind of keeping your eye out for which commands you're in. There's a different fillet for surface, fillet for edge, fillet for corner. All that's 3D. The regular fillet, that's going to be for your like 2D line work. So if I'm in fillet, just like I would kind of anywhere else, you can either click on these options up here, or I can say, okay, these were, well, it was what, 20 by 40. So let's say I want 10-foot radius. Select first curve. So again, when they say curve, they're meaning polylines. So that's kind of interchangeable here. But select first to fillet. I click there. Second to fillet, click there. And I've got my filleted corner. On a surface, little different. And you got to start to build up a bit of a knowledge where you know which one you need to pick. So let's look at a couple of options. So first thing I would do, if you start typing fillet, you're going to get all the other options that are in there. So that's the one we just did, fillet. Then you got fillet corners, fillet edge, fillet surface. What is this one? Fillet surface corner. I'm not even sure what that one is. The one you probably want to pick first is going to be fillet edge. I think that's the one that you typically think of when you're making an edge like that on a surface. So just like we did before, let's make our radius 10 feet. Now instead of a curve, it's asking for a surface. So I'll click that surface, I'll click this surface, and it's going to fillet that corner. However, as you can see, we've got other edges to deal with. So it didn't quite like that right there. So that's not the command to use for that one. But you can see what will happen if you've maybe gotten the wrong one. Now within here, there's a whole bunch of different changes and things that you can kind of mess with. But we're going to cancel that one. So let's check the next one. Fillet. So we did edge, let's try corner. Select poly curves to fillet. So we'll select those ones, radius 10, hit enter. Didn't like that. Didn't like that because it wants to curve this edge, it wants to curve this edge, but it ran into the same problem where we've got that corner over there. So depending on what you're doing, you got to kind of work around. You're going to run into a lot of dead ends. You're going to run into a lot of things where it's like, oh, why are my edges look like this? So let's try fillet, surface, radius 10 feet. Just like, oh, we're in like millimeters or something. So again, we're getting these edges, not what we want. I'm going to cancel that one. So what we really need to do is find which of the commands it's also going to trim my corners off, or just do the whole top. So let's try doing the whole top. Fillet. Let's do edge. Radius is still good. 2, 3, 4. From here, I'll get these little numbers, and I'll start to get a lot of other options up here. Again, I'm going very quickly, but when you do multiple things like this, link handles, that means if I change one of these, all of them are going to update. And we want select fillet handle to edit. We're going to click on that one. If I start to pull that out, it shows what that size is going to be. So I'm just going to click there. Now we start to see how it's picking up all the corners, which we want. And we hit enter, and then it kind of made like a little dome for us. So needs practice to kind of pick up which ones you need to go to. Because fillet's really handy. That's how I make a lot of shapes that have sort of standard corners and things like that. Let's see. Let's cover what are some of our other basics that we need. Explode, just like AutoCAD. But now we've also got shapes, not just lines. So if I click on one of our if I explode this guy, I would assume you all would think that we just are going to get 5 segments, and that's correct. Then from there, just like in CAD, I can select 2, J for join, it's going to join those. So now this is a double piece. At any point, I can click again on one of those points. It'll highlight that point separately, and I can move that around if you need to. Now when we explode let's explode this guy. If we explode this, same idea. It's going to break it down into as many small segments as it can. So now it's got individual pieces. Again, you might not have to have that, but a lot of times I'll build something, explode it just because I need a little piece of it or something like that if I don't trim it out. Let's talk about trim. That's another AutoCAD one that you all should be familiar with. Line work-wise, works exactly the same. Trim, hit enter. This is how I always explain it. This is how it was initially taught to me, so it always made sense. Select cutting objects. You're selecting your scissors. What's doing the cutting, right? So in this case, we want to trim this piece off. So I'm selecting my cutting piece. This is my scissors I'm cutting. I'm going to use to cut through. Select object to trim. So now I'm selecting the piece of paper that I'm cutting off. So if I want to cut this piece off of paper, that's what I'm selecting on. So again, I'm clicking right back into the same command. Select my scissors, enter, select my piece of paper I'm cutting off, and you just click it and then enter and you're done. Just like how it works in AutoCAD. Now in 3D, I can also use curves to trim off solid pieces. So I can do trim, select my scissors, hit enter, cut that piece of paper off. It works on big solid pieces as well. So even if it's 3D, I think this one is, yeah. Probably want to be in top view for that. Trim, enter. I already have my scissors selected, so then I click on that one. It's going to cut that piece off, And one of the things we're going to touch on here in a second, but you'll notice it's an empty box now. So it cut it. It didn't say, oh, I'm actually cutting a solid thing into 2 solid pieces. It just trimmed everything off. So you got to be careful if you want to trim but leave something solid, we have to use a different command. We're going to touch on that one here in a second. But if you just need to cut a piece of anything off, trim command works. Line-wise, extend works exactly the same way as you would in CAD. Extend, whoops. Extend. Come on, Shane. There we go. So reverse. Yes, I'm using the scissors metaphor, but what am I extending to? That is selected, hit enter. What am I extending? Where am I extending from? Click on that one. So order of operations always works the same. Extending surfaces, we got to go into a different command. So if we do extend, I'm not typing very well, extend surface, right there, SRF, that's shorthand for surface on a lot of the commands. I click there, select an edge to extend. So if I select this one, it's going to start extending that surface. I can type in an amount. I could type in 10 feet, and it'll extend it 10 feet. If I did that on this corner, it's going to extend that surface the way that it thinks it's naturally wanting to go. So it's not extruding that line, how it looked like on this one. I mean, this just looked like we were extruding, to the side. This one, it's going to take into account this line and that line. So if I click there, you can see it's wanting to almost rebuild the part that we trimmed off. That will work on any shape. As you're doing different versions of this, as you're extending things, you'll start to realize they come to a point or they'll start to wrap in a real weird way. So you just have to keep an eye on that when you're extending surfaces. Extrude, that's a big one. So this is where we haven't even brought in our CAD file yet. Let's bring on our CAD file. First, I'm going to change my units. Should have done this first. I draft everything in inches. That's pretty standard for most offices. In AutoCAD as well. Feet is usually what you'll get from surveyors, civil engineers, things like that. Architects tend to also draft in inches. If you run into a Euro, they're going to be drafting in millimeters. Like that's just how it goes. So get used to sort of converting things. What's nice about Rhino that AutoCAD cannot do is, as you saw, I was in millimeters, but I was typing everything in feet. It will make those connections. You don't have to be in a certain units. I like to default to inches, so I can just type 8 and it knows I mean 8 inches, but I could type 200 mm, it understands I mean 200 millimeters without changing this. So you can add the little signifiers to the end of any number and it'll understand what you're working towards. But again, usually working in inches. So I'm going to hit that OK. That's fine. Sure. And the reason I want to do that is next step we're going to do to start to build up on stuff is the equivalent command of what an xref is. Do you all know what xrefs are? Okay, good. Thank you for shaking your head, Kasdan. So instead of calling it an xref in Rhino, they call it a work session. Just what they want to call it. So just like in CAD, our layer manager is super important. It's the little thing that looks like a piece of pie up at the top. So if we click on that, just like we would have in CAD, layer manager. So maybe we'll touch on that next time as far as how layer naming standards should be set up, because big stickler on that. But this is where you would add new layers. You'd hit this button up here, new layer, rename it. Let's call it form. I don't know, something. Same idea. Light bulb on and off. Lock, we'll lock it so you can't move it. This first square of color is what you will see in shaded. Do you have a question?
How did you get the layer manager out from the side?
Oh, is yours locking into the side? So if you go to the top of any of those, you should get a little like cross arrow thing. And then you can grab it and pull it out. Or vice versa, you can bring one and drop it back in. I tend to not like to mess with that stuff too much. So yeah, if you prefer it locked into the side, that's also totally fine. I like to have mine floating because I'm usually working on 2 screens, and I'll stick everything I can on the second screen so I've got a full model window. Did you get that? Okay, good. So the first square on the layers, that is going to be the color that you'll see in your shaded view or in your wireframe view. That's not representing materials or textures or anything like that. It's just a way to make sure that you're not going cross-eyed as you're working here. So I like to use very bold, contrasty colors so I can clearly see what I'm working on. The second one, if I click on this, that is where you actually assign materials. We're not going to look at how you set up materials in Rhino today. That's a whole thing. And in a lot of cases, I don't remember the last time I rendered something right out of Rhino. Haven't done it in a long time. You can, and you can make nice things, but I don't know, some of the other programs I think are a little bit better. But what you do need to do if you're going from Rhino to any, I'll talk about Lumion specifically. You do need to go in here to each of your layers and change this. Just click on that. This can say default material up here. You change it to whatever, and you need to name it something like whatever. Let's say this is brick. Just name it brick. If you put a space in there, Lumion will not pick up the space. So if you type in your material window, brick space herringbone, it will only read brick. And if you have another material that has brick at the beginning and then a space, it'll assume that they're the same material. That got me hung up for a long time, so just avoid spaces. Underscore, fine. Basically anything there other than a space, it'll read it. And the way I would encourage you to think about how you set up your layers is absolutely focus on materiality. So if you're building a wall, that wall might have several different materials attached to it. So let's say you have a stucco wall with a cap on it. You're going to have, I would make a layer that says L-stucco wall. My material is going to say stucco wall. And then I'm going to have a layer that's going to say granite cap. And my material will say granite cap on it. That way, when I go in, it's not looking for wall. But then if I have another like veneered wall or hand-laid stone wall, all of those need to be named separately. So then when you go to apply material in it in Lumion or something like that, it's going to pick up all of those different materials. It's probably about as most I'm going to talk about materials today, just because it's a deep topic. But pretty much if you have your layer, think about whatever the material is, make your layers that way, and then mimic the same name in your material name, you'll be fine. Like you'll be set up. You'll figure out where you messed up here and there because stuff will come in as default or blank or whatever. But if you kind of stick to that process, you should be fine. So sorry, we were talking about work sessions. So you open up your layers. In this empty space down here, right click, you're going to get another window that pops up. Attach model. This is where I believe I just put this on the desktop. You've got to change, this always gets me too, I'll go to the file, I'm like, I know my DWG's in there. Got to make sure to change this down here. It's not going to be looking for all viable model types or anything like that. LSP, that is the site plan for this project. So I'm just going to hit open. This is going to pop up. This is important for a couple of pieces. One is you can leave all this stuff checked up here. If it's checked, that's fine. I would leave all of these unchecked because you don't want wide polylines to convert to surfaces. Really shouldn't be using wide polylines anyway in CAD, but that's a whole other thing. All this stuff can be off. Mesh precision, don't worry about it. We don't have any meshes that we're importing, so we don't have to worry about that. And what you just want to make sure is whatever your model units were in AutoCAD, match what our units are here. So this is why I just kind of do everything in inches, so I don't really have to double check myself. But you want model units set to inches, because I know that that file is set to inches. Layout units, doesn't really matter. We're not setting up any layout sheets for this. So I'm just going to hit OK. That'll take a minute. And then we get this down here now. So it's going to have the file name right there. So LSP Sahagan-site, that is the name that we called that file. And if I hit the little caret, it's going to show all my layers that I have in there. Again, if you're really good with your layer management, you should know which ones were in those files, which ones were maybe part of the XREF, things like that. This, don't judge me by these. We try to be a little cleaner in my office. This is just an older plan. But what's nice is you can turn certain layers off, certain layers on. You don't have to, basically you can treat this as any other layer. I'm going to click out of this. Quick session on, I know we're running out of time. Just like in CAD, Z-enter starts your zoom command. A couple of these are slightly different with the shortcuts. Like if I wanted to see everything that I have in my model space in CAD, I would type Z-enter, E-enter for extents, as in it's going to zoom all the way out to the extents of my drawing. They had that one in here as well, so I can hit E-enter, and it's going to zoom all the way out. That will happen in perspective view, top view, whichever one that you're in. Similarly, I'm just going to click on a random spot that's not part of the survey. Let's click this. I can, if I have something selected, I can type Z, enter, S, enter, as in selected, and it will zoom, whoop, come on, zoom in, there we go. It'll zoom in on that specific object. So if you kind of get a little lost, you can always go into your layers, right click on, let's say, what's a good one in here? How about medium? Here we go, let's do this one. You can right click on any of these layers. This also applies to your non-work sessioned objects, but I can select those objects on that layer, go back in here. Let's just close this guy, Z enter, S enter, and it'll zoom in on all of those that are selected. So if you get a little lost, just grab something in one of your layers and zoom in on it, and it'll kind of recenter your camera. Likewise, one last little thing with the camera work, although this is doing pretty well, is sometimes your camera will get focused on something off to the side, and then you want to rotate around your other work. But as you can see, it's not wanting to rotate kind of centered on all of this stuff. It's sort of off to the side, so it's a little weird to try to orbit around. At any time, just select the thing you want to rotate around. In this case, it's selecting a XREF block that came in with our stuff. Let's select like this little curve here. By doing that Z enter, S enter, it resets the camera to that location. So now if I zoom around or I orbit around, it's centered on that last point that I zoomed in on. We are running out of time, so I'm going to try to cruise through a few things. I don't know if we're going to get to grading. Extrude curve, very, very important. You'll probably use that to build 50% of all of your stuff. Once this is work sessioned in, I can use all this line work. I can build stuff off of it. What I can't do is I can't grab this, what is this, like a chair in a fire pit or something like that. If I try to move this, it's going to snap right back. I can't actually change the work session line work, but I can bring it in and work off of it. So for example, if I wanted to make this coping, so if you don't know, coping is the piece of stone that goes around the outside of a pool. I can click on this piece or that line and this line, type extrude curve, and it will extrude those lines directly up. A lot of options in here to be aware of. One, the main one, is actually solid yes or no. Basically, if this is turned on, I get a top and a bottom piece of that extrusion. If I have it off, I'm just going to get two individual surfaces. So if you're extruding and you want it to all be one thing, make sure that's on solid. Similarly, you'll see it's going both up and down. That's a little chaotic. So what we can do is change this either yes or no for both sides. So if I click, I can either, oh, and anything up here that's underlined, that's the hot or shortcut for it. So I could type B enter instead of clicking there, and that'll just go in one direction. And let's make sure our solid's turned on. And then at any point, coping is usually going to be between 2.5 and 3 inches. So I'll type 2.5. My default is inches, and I just click, and I've got coping. Then if I want to continue creating this pool, let's say this is our elevation we're at, but now I want to build the inside of the pool. Well, I'd select that inside edge of the coping, offset just like Rhino, offset. Coping usually hangs over like 2 inches, so I'll do 2. Select that line, that's right there. Extrude curve. Let's say we want solid off. And let's say the deepest part of our pool is like 6 feet. So I just type 6 feet. It's now basically snapping to a 6-foot distance. And just wherever I push my mouse, it's going to assume that that's the direction we're going. So click. I've now got 6-foot pool wall all the way around. And let's say we're making a simple sort of slope from one end to the other. Again, my little 4-point surface. Click on that. Snap to the midpoint. This is not how this pool actually looks. This is just an example. Snap to perpendicular, because that's based off of the midpoint. Snap to the corner. Snap to the corner. Got little pool bottom, whatever. If the whole thing was 6 feet deep, some people have these crazy pools where the whole thing is like 8 feet deep. They have to sign special waivers, actually. But let's say I just want to make a quick bottom to this pool. That was all the same shape. Well, I could do a 2-point surface. I could do a 4-point surface. I could do loft, which is a new one. Big fan of loft. Use that a lot with grading. Loft is a way to connect two edges without clicking certain points or corners. So I could just click, whoops, let's not click this. Oh, if you accidentally select something, hold down Control, click again. So I'm snapping from that edge to that edge, or lofting from that edge to that edge. And all it did was just make a surface for me. This one's flat. We'll look at a little bit more complicated version of this. But one thing, if all of a sudden this comes in and it looks like it's connecting to each, but that I twisted it, it gets a little confused sometimes because it denotes what the start and end of a line is, and it's going to try to connect end to end, start to start. That will look like this if it's messed up. So it's trying to connect this corner to that corner, this corner to that corner, so you get a weird shape. If you ever run into that, all you got to do is go to Align Curves, and you'll click on one of those, and it'll flip it. It'll know that it needs the start and the end to go to the other sides. So once you got that set up, there's a lot of other options in here. We'll look at this maybe if we get to grading. I don't know if we're going to today, but you just hit OK. So when I'm building up a model like this, I'll build all my surfaces as simply as I can based off of materials. So in here, I would have a layer for pool wall, layer for pool coping, layer for pool terrace, which is out here. That's based off of, actually, maybe we'll do that for the grading since that's somewhat quick. So yeah, pool terrace will be a different material. Lawn will be a different material or a different layer. Anything that's a different material, new layer, call it something else. You're not charged by how many layers you have, so feel free to make as many as you want. So we've got 3 minutes. Did not cover near what I wanted to get to. We can go over a little bit if you all want to stay, but I think it might be more useful now if you have specific questions like, hey, I'm working on this thing, I'm trying to do this, how would I get there? Or we didn't touch base on how to make this funky shape, how would you do that? Anything like that is fine. Otherwise, I can just keep talking for another 10 minutes. But if you have specific questions, we can knock those out. I can show examples, whatever. Okay, I'll just keep talking then. That's fine. Let's talk a little bit about the grading stuff, actually. But yeah, work sessions, super handy if you've got your CAD drawn and planned, because now everything's in place. You're just extruding things up, connecting surfaces, all that kind of stuff. If you're lucky, you might have a survey base that has topography at their actual levels. I'm going to open up. I'm not going to save that. Nope. Let's open up that example real quick, and I can just talk through a few things. Grading is probably why I think Rhino is superior over basically all the other modeling software, because there's so many different ways you can make surfaces, basically to the level of resolution that you want to make them. So even within this, I'm using 2 different methods of creating the grade. And you can kind of see that. This, look, you got some regular grid on here. It's a big singular surface. If I zoomed in on a couple of these contours, it would not be hitting those contours exactly, but it's very close. Like, especially close enough that if you're building this to mostly make renders off of and not produce any sort of, because in a lot of cases, like I've worked on projects where the grading is so complicated, I need to do it in 3D and then re-export the contours to CAD. Oh, maybe we'll cover that today because that is a handy thing everybody likes. But in other cases, like the focal area of this is a residential pool project. I needed to make sure that the contours in here matched my grading plan perfectly. So I wasn't way off on something. I knew I was hitting my percentages right. So the way I did that is all I did is, okay, let's open this and attach the work session. Those should line up. Yep, all that's good. I believe this should line up. Nice. Oh, no, this is an older plan. I grabbed the wrong plan. That's okay. We could do this without that. Work session. Oh, if you need to get rid of that, right-click on here, work session reference, detach model. If it's anything other than a CAD plan and you change it somewhere else, don't really run into this a lot, but sometimes I'll build things in Rhino and a singular, it could be a house, multiple buildings, and an architect sent to me, something like that. I'll keep that file as is. I'll also work session the Rhino file in. Then if somebody makes an update to that, I can hit update and work session reference. It'll automatically update whatever changes were made in the other file. You can't do that with CAD. For some reason, they've never made it so you can just hit update. You got to detach, reattach. But let's just detach this guy. And we'll look at what we've got in here. Okay, yeah, last thing to talk about. So let's just grab these contours that are over here to show some examples. So the quick way of making a big graded surface, if you have something like contours, which are always handy, the quick way to make a surface off of these, you select all of them, type patch, P-A-T-C-H. You'll get a pop-up here. What this means is sample point spacing. That is, the higher the number that is, the more detailed it's going to try to get to all of these contours. It can go up to, I believe, 100. If you push it up to 100 and your computer is not going to be able to handle it, I'm sure these are all fine. It can take a while, but I'll usually start low, build up. Same idea for the U and the V spans. That's talking about what these are. These what I call those ISO curves. If you have a big surface, increase that number, because if you have it stuck at 10 and this surface has got up, like the surface I've got highlighted or the contours, that's probably a good, I don't know, 400 by 100 feet. So if you only have 10 spans in between, it's not going to be very accurate. So again, that's another one where let's just kick this up to 100 so you can see what it looks like. Stiffness, leave that at 1. That's one of those, it's going to try to, the higher that number goes, I've noticed it just makes funky surfaces that you can't use afterwards. So I usually keep that at 1. Adjust tangency, automatic trim. You can keep all of that on or turn it off. That's up to you. Automatic trim will just prevent it from getting too big. You'll see here in a sec. So I'm just going to hit OK. It's going to take a minute, build a surface, but it's patch surface. So again, not overly accurate, but it's going to do its best to try to connect all of those contours together. I will specifically use that. You saw on the model example, all the perimeter outside stuff. I do that because I need, when you are producing renderings, don't be overly worried about building everything perfectly. It's a stage set. It is think theater. It is where are my cameras going? What am I focused on? And what's on the outside? What's on the perimeter? And that's basically your level of resolution that you want to apply to stuff. So I'll build this big surface on the outside. See, we shouldn't even have made it 100. Let's try it at 10. Yeah, let's do that. That's there, so when I brought this into, I either did this in Lumion or D5, I'm going to put like trees and plants and stuff just in the background to fill my perspective view up and make it feel whole. But I don't need to get it to the contours perfectly. That's not, it's all existing conditions. We're not measuring anything out there or anything like that. So I'll keep that at patch because I can make a surface pretty quick and it comes out decently. So this is what we got from that. So that looks pretty darn close. You can see right here, a couple of these contours are dipping back behind the surface. Again, not perfect, but you can generate a pretty quick surface that has nice curves and things like that. Then what I'll do, so I built that for this entire site. Then I basically made a perimeter out here and I trimmed the center out. I just trimmed it out and deleted it. Then from there, I used loft for in between other curves and my proposed contours and surfaces. So all this shape is this is a loft from that proposed contour line and this edge of the pool deck. And it makes a shape, or it makes that surface. So if I need really detailed grading, I use loft. That's why all these kind of look like weird stretched out shapes. They're not going to be stretched out when you go to render it. It's just how they present the ISO curves and things like that. So all this shape in here, that's all loft. Every single one of it's loft. You might have to break the contour off a little bit, because if I try to loft like, here, let's delete this. This will be the last thing we do because we need to wrap up. If I try to just come right in here and loft these two lines together, I'm going to get a really funky shape. So you can see what it's doing is it's breaking down that curve into points and then trying to associate points in between the two curves. So this came out pretty well because these have a similar number of points along this curve. But then you can see there was all of a sudden a bunch of or more points along this curve than there were up here. So now this point's trying to connect to this point over here. You start to get in this weird folding thing on the surface. I want to avoid that. And then once we get out here, it sort of then flipped. Then all of a sudden this one got concentrated. So these lines are trying to connect all down here. And then once we get all the way out here, it starts to get really wackadoo. And this is not going to work. There's a fold here. There's just pieces that are just not matching up really well. So really all I do is I'll come in here and I'll start splitting. Maybe our last command we'll talk about. Split. Actually, let's do one at a time. Select cutting objects or point is what I want. And then all I'm going to do is, let's say, split there, split here, split there, and down here, same idea. Split here. I wasn't fully paying attention to what I was doing. Split there. Then lofting from U to U. There's that flip. Align curves. I just turn it. Hit OK. This one to this one. Not bad. This amount of sort of movement in those ISO curves, totally fine. It's when they start to get pinched in those corners and fold over that you want to avoid. But then we've got this piece out here. Well, I can do loft. Click on this one. P for, sorry, I'm pointing my screen. P for point up there. And then click on this point right there. And it'll just make it go from the line to a point. You can do that anywhere, not just for contours. But I try to have, anywhere I'm lofting contours, lofting shapes, try to keep it as clean as possible. So yeah, if you got to split a contour up a little bit, go for it. Like, again, not a big deal. You can imagine this would get really complicated down in here unless this was an area where you had to have exactly perfect model because you're taking measurements off of it. You might have to rebuild this a little bit or get really fine lofting in there. Otherwise, patch the whole thing. Keep moving. Don't worry about it. Like, again, this area over here, not the focus. Focus is where your cameras are going to be. So as I was building this, I knew, okay, I'm probably going to have an entry sequence from the driveway. There's a set of door. See, I didn't even build the house because I knew I was setting my camera up in a way I'm not even going to look at the house. I didn't have house plans. I had limited photos to go off of. It would have taken a day to build the house. Wasn't in the budget. So I'll just set the camera up so I'm standing, house is right behind me and I'm looking out. But if you think about the way that people are going to use space, unless they're like, I absolutely want to see this outside or as if I'm looking through my window. I mean, really in that case, I'll take a picture inside their house and then Photoshop the view into the window. Again, try to keep it as simple as possible. Don't I'm not going to go build a kitchen to then set up a render inside to look out. That's a waste of time. But keeping how people are going to use the space. Okay, somebody's going to park here. They're going to walk through this little arbor thing. That's a shot. I'm going to position it so I don't see the house, or if I do, I see just the corner of it. They had a double set of doors here. We had a view from there, view from here, a couple of aerials kind of focused down at angles, and then a couple of shots inside the pool that were specifically, again, avoiding the house. So I know we're going over. There's so much more to get to, honestly. But again, any initial questions? What I would suggest, and either write this down or re-listen to the thing, go through all the drafting options, sorry, not all the drafting options, the main ones. Just understand, okay, can I make a rectangle that's 20 by 40? If you can, you're probably going to be fine. Oh, last command I absolutely have to cover because this one is super important is the scales, because Rhino has the best setup for that. So in AutoCAD, you can only scale things. So it's going to scale in X and Y dimensions. Here, actually, let's get a box. That's what we really want here. I'll just put it right on top of here. Z enter, S enter. Okay, so I got a box. Let's say all of a sudden, oh, well, my height and my width is good, but I need this to be 10 feet long. Well, if I do scale normally, it's going to scale in all three directions, X, Y, and Z, Z being the height in this situation. But Rhino's got scale 2D, which is super handy. Scale 2D. If you're in perspective, it's going to scale your X and your Y only, not your height. So instead of making it taller, it's just going to get longer and wider. And then lastly, and this is essentially the one I only use, scale 1D is amazing because I don't even have to type in the size of the box if I don't know what it is yet. Maybe it's in relation to something else. I can click here, say, oh, this needs to be 8 feet. This needs to be 4 feet. And like 12 inches tall. So being able to go in one dimension, you'll start to use that a lot because that's how you make little adjustments, scale things based off of other things, all that kind of stuff. Rotate works exactly the same way as it does in AutoCAD. This is the last command. I know I just said that. Rotate 3D, gotta know that one. So in this case, you gotta think about rotate 3D as a steering wheel. What I need to establish first is actually the steering wheel column. So what am I rotating around? So if I want this edge to flip up, I actually need my column, my steering wheel column to go perpendicularly to that. So click there. Now you see your normal rotate circle, but it's going in the direction I want. So just hold shift, move my mouse so it's up, click again, it's directly up. Again, you can type in your degree increments, all that kind of stuff. That one takes some practice, but again, just like the scissors and the paper, steering wheel column, steering wheel. That's what you're kind of working towards. Scale, rotate. So yes, sorry, lastly, what I would suggest working on if you're just getting into this, practice the drafting tools, stick to the basics. Don't worry about all the, I mean, feel free to try all those other things out or look them up, but get really good at the basics. Get really good at being able to know, let's say you're making a circle. Are you typing in the radius or are you typing in the diameter? You should know how to change that. That'll be in your options up in the top. But getting used to typing in lengths, getting used to typing in commands. I was clicking on a lot of buttons, but learn those commands. That little second it saves you to type versus clicking on a button. Over the span of a project, we're talking about saving days and time, or days and weeks of time, especially if you're going to be working in big offices one day, working on projects that are, years long, things like that. Typing, that stuff adds up, and you pick it up over time. But yeah, drafting both the 2D and the 3D. Try out a couple of the modifiers. That would be rotate, scale, fillet. We didn't get to Boolean. We'll try to get on that one next time. Explode, join. Really, any of those ones I think are good. Am I forgetting any? Oh, there's tons in there. But those would be the main ones I would try to work on first, those basic modifiers. Really anything you know how to do in CAD, see if you can do it in here. That'll give you, because you definitely can. We may have not covered it, but you can look it up. Or come on the Discord and ask me. I'm there during the day. We also Kaz has been helping me out with that. We're also building a learning language model in there. So if it's off hours for me, you can go into the Rhino section and say, how do I connect two surfaces? It'll spit you an answer out that's actually pretty good. So give it a try. And the more questions people ask, the better our model's going to get, the more I know what people are asking for, things like that. So we can make that really good. But practice the drafting, practice the modifiers, practice trying to bring it, even if it's a simple CAD plan you have. I mean, simple. It could be like, I want to build a bench, and you have like a bench drawing or whatever. Give it a try. Bring it in, extrude things out of it, try copying that line work and manipulating it. Layer management. If you need to go export, we didn't really get to it, but if you want to go from whatever you're doing in Rhino to Lumion, export as a DAE file type. It's called a Kaleida, but the file extension is DAE. Reasons for doing that is if you make any blocks, it will export the blocks. You can export as an FBX. It will not take the blocks with you. So if you go and load up your thing in Lumion and you made blocks in Rhino, if you export as an FBX, it won't bring it. I would suggest not using the screen file sync with Lumion. Doesn't really help, and it's just going to slow your stuff down. So export to a DAE, then you can just refresh the model if you save over your previous one. Just like in most programs, if you have the ability to have your project as close as possible to the 0 origin point, Rhino is going to be much happier. Lumion will be much happier, all of those, because they are trying to figure out coordinates. And if all of a sudden you're working on a survey that's like 10,000 feet from that origin point, Rhino will start to glitch a little bit. It's like the surfaces aren't totally there. The camera doesn't like it. Lumion is the same way. Materials get a little messy if you're super far away from the origin point. And if you have to work far away from the origin point, you can export with origin and then just make a new one wherever you want to have it. Okay, sorry we didn't get to more. We got to call it somewhere.